My father always believed that money is the only true measure of a person's worth, and he said it not as a metaphor, not with a hint of bitterness or irony, but as an immutable truth, as a dogma that is not disputed, but accepted or abandoned. And on the day when I finally decided to leave home, not in a fit of rebellion, but in a desperate attempt to preserve at least a tiny sense of self-worth, he tried to demonstrate to me vividly, almost theatrically, how little he thought I was worth, as if I were a commodity that had not passed control. A quality, or a thing whose usefulness has run out. Obviously, with that same cool grin that I remember from childhood, when he would pull me out for a sloppily put-on dress or for an unnecessary word at the table, he threw a crisp bill at my feet, so strangely denominated, $99, as if this missing unit was the last slap in the face. "Here's $99 for you," he smiled bitterly, like an actor on stage, before the last curtain. "That's all you deserve." And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. I was 25. I had just graduated from college, having suffered, begged, and earned my engineering degree, not fashionable, not glamorous, not inherited by the Millers but mine. None of my parents came to the graduation ceremony. No flowers, no hugs, not even a cold message on the phone. I stood alone in the crowd of other people's joys, in a dress that I put on with trembling hands, watching other girls huddle in the arms of their mothers, as fathers pat their sons on the shoulder, saying toasts and promises. I was standing in the huge cold space of our luxurious living room, without flowers, without love, with only one suitcase, where I carefully packed everything: books, a couple of dresses, photographs, a thesis written in the night, and the only hope that I would have the courage to walk to the door. I watched in silence as this strange, almost mocking bill sank to the marble floor, drifting like a fallen leaf from a tree that had long since stopped feeding on light. The bill was a symbol of what the Miller family valued most: control, status, ostentatious generosity that had no warmth behind it. I was surrounded by this icy wealth: sparkling crystal chandeliers that seemed to contemptuously stare down from above, carefully polished antique furniture that looked more like a museum exhibit than household items, priceless paintings with surnames written in gold on the plaques, as if even art was supposed to be not a manifestation of the soul, but a proof of status. It was all part of the Miller family, our ancient financial clan, our investment blood mixed with Wall Street steel. Our family has always been investment bankers. Generations of men have walked these same corridors, repeating each other's fate step by step, as if following a ruler. They studied at the same universities, joined the same clubs, married girls from the same districts, and eventually settled into the chairs of the beautiful offices of the Miller and Sons Investment Group. It was a path that was not so much suggested as stamped by fate, a path that every Miller's son obediently followed, as if there had never been a choice. Until I broke the tradition. Engineering business. It was like a whispered curse that made my father barely contain his gag reflex. He spat in disgust, yes, literally, when I first mentioned my specialty. "Engineers are nothing more than glorified mechanics," he said, as if I'd confessed that I was going to fix toilets rather than launch satellites. "None of my sons will spend their lives messing with cars." But it wasn't the fuss, or the oil on my fingers, or the iron. I clearly saw something that he didn't notice, and it seems that no one in our brilliant family noticed, blinded by the reflection of their own portraits in marble. While they were scrupulously counting their millions, as if eternity could be bought with the right investment in the fund, I imagined a different future. Based on technology, ideas, and people who are not afraid to try new things and make mistakes. Based on innovation and unlimited possibilities. I've read about young entrepreneurs building empires in garages and labs, about minds who wore dreams instead of silk ties. I believed to the point of trembling, that the next great fortune would appear not in a paneled office, but in a quiet corner of the campus, in a dark basement where someone was awake to invent tomorrow's world. My mother was standing near the grand staircase, all in beige tones, with a martini glass, which she held with such grace, like a scene from an old movie, despite the fact that it was only noon on the clock. She looked up from her glass and, swaying slightly, said, looking past me, "Charles, darling," that's what she always called me, as if a diminutive name could bring me back to her comfort zone. "There's still time to fix this. Go back to the firm. Your father can sort things out with the board of directors." I looked at her intently, as I had probably never done before, and suddenly I saw in her face a woman who had long ago stopped living for herself. Her smile was flawless, as if honed by mirrors and upbringing, but never, never. I didn't touch my eyes. I realized that all my life she had measured her worth not by feelings, not by thoughts, but by the size and brilliance of her rings. Each new ring became a little heavier, a little brighter, a little more expensive, as if one more stone could finally fill the void that had settled in her when she chose the path of tacit consent. "No, Mom," I said softly but firmly. "I'm tired of being who you both would like me to be." My father's face, which had been restrainedly angry, suddenly darkened, filled with anger, and again, as in childhood, when I broke a vase or argued, it turned bright red, like an overheated kettle. "Then get out," he snapped, his voice a mixture of rage, frustration, and wounded pride. "You're not Miller anymore. You're walking away from your trust fund, your connections, your legacy. And all this for the sake of some stupid fantasy." I knelt down, slowly, almost ceremoniously, and picked up this $99 bill, as if it were the last relic from the past, to which I decided to say goodbye. It seemed strangely new, almost deliberately selected, as if the father had told his assistant to get the freshest bill so that this scene would be finished. "Keep your trust fund," I said, putting the bill in an old leather purse that I gave myself for my 20th birthday. "I'll build something myself." My father laughed bitterly, and his voice, full of icy contempt, echoed off the high ceilings of our sleek mansion, where every corner breathed money, but not love. "Are you building something?" He sneered, with that special mixture of venom and arrogance that he seemed to have invented specifically for communicating with me. "Can you barely dress yourself?" His finger, thin, well-groomed, with a massive white gold ring, pointed at my shirt as a simple cotton thing bought on sale at a store where none of the Millers would show up even by mistake. The trousers were straight, gray, and slightly frayed at the knees. No tailor had touched their fabric. Everything about me, from my clothes to my eyes, irritated him to the core, as if I had betrayed some upper caste into which I was born, but to which I had never truly belonged. "You're nothing without the name Miller," he breathed, almost with relief, as if he'd finally pronounced the verdict that had been preparing in his head for a long time. These harsh words have become my inner mantra, an echo that has not left me for many years. They accompanied me on those sleepless nights when the cold of the apartment chilled to the bone, when money was running out, and self-confidence was wobbling like a house of cards. These words lived in my memory when I was faced with rejection, misunderstanding, loneliness, fatigue, and pain, but they were the ones that spurred me on to go forward to prove to him one day that I was wrong. But at that moment, standing there in the center of the marble hall, under a crystal chandelier shining like an ice crown, I showed neither fear nor anger. I just smiled, not triumphantly, not defiantly, but calmly, really calmly, and said, "Just look at me." And I left. I walked out of the front door, feeling not just the door slowly closing behind me, but the whole era of my life. I had nothing with me except $99 neatly folded in my wallet, a suitcase with my belongings, and an engineering degree, which my parents considered almost an insult. The moment the iron gates of the house I grew up in slammed shut behind me, I realized, I'm not just leaving, I'm letting go. I say goodbye to the illusion, with the hope that one day they will love me not for my achievements, not for my last name, not for meeting their expectations, but simply for who I am. I was standing at the gate, breathing in the cool spring air, and suddenly realized the reality of my situation. I had no car, no apartment, no confidence in the future. All I had left was a small amount of money and determination. But there was something more valuable than anything the Millers could give, a clear, distinct vision of the future and a desire that made my chest ache to make that future a reality. I turned around and walked forward, down a street I'd never walked down, even though I'd lived next to it for 25 years. At the nearest bus stop, I bought a ticket to Austin, Texas, for $65. The route seemed random, but in fact, I had long kept in mind articles about startups, universities, and tech hubs that originated there. I spent the remaining $5 on a modest burger and French fries in a small, dusty diner near the station, which smelled of fried onions, old coffee, and other people's stories. I sat at a plastic table by the window, watching the buses pull up as strangers say goodbye, meet, leave, and return, and suddenly realized, For the first time in my life, I am not part of a play staged by others. I am the author of my own script. I took out a notebook from my suitcase, the cover of which had already been erased by time, and wrote down 4 promises to myself. First, I will never rely on Miller's name. That name no longer determines my fate. Second, I'm going to build something meaningful, not for revenge, not for fame, but because I believe I can. Third, I will change the world, even in a small part, even for one person, but I will. And the fourth and most important thing is that I will never again ask for love where there is none. From that day on, my new life began. At first, I slept in the pantry of the cafe where I got a job. My bed is full of sacks of coffee beans, surrounded by boxes of paper cups, crates of syrups, and the noise of the refrigerator. But I felt free. During the day, I worked tirelessly. I smiled at customers, brewed coffee, washed tables, learned to listen to people and see stories in them, not posts. At night, when the cafe was empty and the city outside the windows was frozen, I took out my notebooks, drawings, and, using the Wi-Fi of the establishment, studied patents, read articles, and followed the latest technological advances. I was working on my idea of an energy storage system that could change the way we think about batteries. Olivia, my colleague, a girl with freckles and an endless supply of irony, sometimes brought me leftover pastries. She sat next to me, looking over my shoulder, and looked at my complicated diagrams with amazing interest. Sometimes her seemingly random questions helped me to take a fresh look at the task. So, basically, you're just making a better battery? She asked one evening, propping her chin on her hand. Not really, I replied softly, pointing to the diagram. Conventional batteries lose too much energy during storage and transportation. I'm trying to use a molecular structure that will allow energy storage with an efficiency of almost 99%. Her eyes widened. Why isn't anyone doing this yet? She wondered. I smiled. Because it's considered theoretically impossible, I replied. But I think I've found a way out. 5 months later, I had saved enough to rent a tiny room in a shared house, 6 people like me, programmers, mechanics, students. We had one kitchen, one shower, constant heating interruptions, and endless conversations about the future. I had a desk, a lamp, a couple of shelves, and, most importantly, silence in which to concentrate. To supplement my income, I started taking on small freelance projects, doing engineering consulting for local startups who, like me, were trying to survive in this turbulent ocean of ideas, hopes, and uncertainty. I solved complex technical problems, often spent nights working on other people's prototypes, correcting miscalculations and optimizing circuits, all for the sake of being able to stay afloat for another month, buy myself some time, some air, some peace of mind. It was during this period that I met Edward Evans, a man who came into my life unexpectedly, but became an important part of it. Edward ran a small but promising startup developing autonomous power systems for agricultural drones, and when I helped him solve a serious problem related to power management on a critically low charge, he shook my hand without hiding his emotions and said, "Your solution saved us months of work." He was looking at me intently, as if trying to see something more beyond the engineering solution. "What else are you working on?" he asked after a pause in which there was no sense of formal politeness, but real curiosity. I hesitated for a moment. The habit of not sharing my dreams with people, especially men from the world of technology, was deep in me, but then, trusting my intuition, I told him about my main project, the one for which I lived and breathed, an energy storage system using a unique molecular configuration. Edward didn't interrupt or comment. He just silently and thoughtfully studied my notes, flipping through notebooks filled with small handwriting, graphs, calculations, formulas, and only after a long pause said, "This can really change everything." He spoke softly, almost reverently, and then added, in a more businesslike tone, "But you will need serious funding to create a working prototype." "I know," I replied just as quietly, almost in a whisper, as if I was afraid to scare away hope. "I have long since left behind the wealth of my family, the abandoned trust fund, and everything that could provide comfort, but not freedom. I've been working on it, tirelessly and not allowing myself to forget what it's all about. Since then, Edward has become more than just a client for me. He introduced me to Dr. Andrea Bell, a brilliant molecular engineer from Oxford, a woman with a mind as sharp as a scalpel and a look that penetrates to the very core of any idea. For 7 intense hours, she challenged my every hypothesis, meticulously examined my calculations, and caught the slightest inconsistencies, as if testing my strength. I remembered that $99 bill, those words from my father, and I didn't flinch. And when she finally nodded slowly, there was an expression on her face that I will never forget. "It's ambitious, perhaps impossible," she said thoughtfully, as if she were arguing with herself. "But if it works." She paused, and then added, "I know some people at the Lincoln Laboratory Energy Research Center at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Do you want to use their services?" I trembled inwardly. MIT, the Lincoln Laboratory, one of the best in the world, a place where only a few are allowed. Did I want to? I've been dreaming about this. But keeping calm, as if it were a business proposal, I simply replied, "Yes, would really appreciate it." From that moment, perhaps the most exhausting year of my life began. In the morning, I continued to work in the cafe, pouring coffee, wiping tables, talking to regular customers, as if everything in my life was still simple. During the day, I did freelance consulting. I helped with projects, fixed other people's schemes, and learned how to negotiate. In the evening, I spent hours in the Lincoln Laboratory, immersed in experiments, observations, and discussions with scientists, many of whom looked at me with disbelief at first. And at night, when the city was asleep, I returned to my project, rechecking calculations, testing hypotheses, falling asleep over drawings, with a cup of cold coffee in my hand. I lived on adrenaline, caffeine, and endless hope that wouldn't let me stop, despite my fatigue, doubts, and fear of failure. And then one day, at the beginning of spring, at 4 a.m, when the air in the laboratory was cold and the walls were silent, as if witnessing something important, there was a breakthrough. For weeks, I've been testing various molecular configurations, changing structures, and selecting parameters. And suddenly the data came, accurate, clear, repeatable. The prototype achieved an energy storage efficiency of 98.7%, a result that was considered impossible, almost a myth. I double-checked the results 3 times, checking every step, every formula. I couldn't believe it wasn't a mistake, but everything pointed to one thing: it had happened. Dr. Bell came by herself to personally review the results. She was silent for a long time, running her finger across the screen, and then, turning to me, she said, "This is not just a breakthrough. It's revolutionary." And a few days later, I was sitting in conference rooms with representatives of venture capital companies, for the first time in my life, not begging for attention, but presenting what they really needed. Edward helped me prepare presentations, drew up a business plan, and Olivia, whose participation became unexpectedly important to me, tirelessly rehearsed with me the answers to the most inconvenient questions that investors could ask. Her questions were sharp, sometimes painful, but they made me stronger, more accurate, more confident. The first 2 investors listened to me with respect, recognized the potential, but left, saying it was too risky. The third one was different. Douglas, the lead partner at Vertex Frontier Ventures, leaned forward, looking me straight in the eye. "Your technology can revolutionize the field of renewable energy storage," he said, "but why should we trust a 24-year-old unknown person?" She inhaled. And she said, "Because all last year I proved that the impossible can become possible. Give me a chance and I'll prove it again." He looked at me for a long time, and then, almost imperceptibly, nodded. Vertex Frontier Ventures invested $12 million in a 23% stake in my company, which I named Ether Grid Technologies, as a sign that even in the void, light can be born if you have the courage to go all the way. Thanks to the funds I received after concluding the deal with Vertex Frontier Ventures, I finally had the opportunity to turn into reality what previously existed only on paper, in formulas, diagrams, and the restless faith that lived somewhere deep inside me, despite fatigue, fears, and endless doubts. I created our research center, a small space, but filled with meaning, a place where every wall breathed opportunity, where the air seemed thicker with ideas and aspirations. I assembled a team, not by the big names on the resume, but by the eyes that had that fire in them, by the hands that were ready to work day and night, by the voices that were not afraid to tell the truth. We were young, stubborn, and infinitely ambitious. Together, we faced daily technical obstacles, failures, and mistakes that seemed to negate everything we had done before. Sometimes we looked at each other in silence, in which there was a question asked without words. Sometimes we stayed in the lab until dawn, rereading specifications that no one paid attention to, testing new approaches, knowing that they probably wouldn't work, but not allowing ourselves to give up. There were moments when a dream that seemed so bright faded under the onslaught of reality, and we felt like we were on the edge. But we got up again, tried again, believed again. And now, after 3 years filled with sweat, quarrels, coffee, despair, and new hypotheses, our hard work has borne fruit. Our first commercial-scale energy storage system, the very project that once began with simple diagrams in a notebook and conversations with Olivia in a cafe, was finally ready for full-fledged testing. When the results came in, we didn't believe it at first. They were so fantastic. We double-checked, retested, and looked for a catch, making sure we didn't make a mistake. But it all fit. The system showed energy storage and transmission efficiency at 98.9%, a result 5 times higher than the best existing solutions at that time. It was not just a technical success, it was a breakthrough that turned the energy industry upside down. Suddenly, renewable energy sources such as solar and wind have transformed from the eternal dreams of environmentalists into a real, practical, and most importantly, economically profitable alternative to fossil fuels. In a matter of weeks, all the major energy companies and corporations that had not even responded to our letters before showed interest in our technology. The company Ether Grid Technologies lit up on the world map like a new sun. 2 years after we received the investment from VertX, we went public. The day our shares started trading was like a storm for me. Calls, interviews, charts, numbers, and all this in some incredible whirlwind. By the end of the first day, the price had doubled. By the end of the week, my stake in the company was estimated at more than $250 million. Sometimes I caught myself thinking that all this was a dream, that I would wake up in that very pantry, among the bags of coffee, but then I looked at the team, at Olivia, at the numbers, at the result, and realized that this was my reality. The reality that I built myself. For the first time since I left my parents' house, I decided to buy a suit. But I didn't go to the exclusive tailor my father probably still went to, with his monograms, hand-sewn linings, and fabrics imported from Seville Row. I went to a boutique catering to technology company executives and chose a simple, perfectly fitting suit there, functional but with grace. I was accompanied by Olivia, who over the years has not only stayed by my side, but has become our head of operations, a person I could rely on in any situation. "Are you planning to impress someone special?" she teased, tilting her head slightly and watching me examine myself in the mirror. "No," I replied, slowly adjusting my collar, feeling the fabric fall over my shoulders, "but I think it's time to finally visit home. Family. I haven't spoken to them in 6 years. No letters, no calls, no attempts at rapprochement, from both sides. But I knew, thanks to the news, rumors, and analytics, that the once powerful Miller & Sons investment group was going through difficult times. Traditional investment banking, which had been supported for centuries by families like mine, was crumbling under the pressure of new financial technologies and emerging markets. Everything was going exactly as I had predicted many years ago, when I tried to explain to my father that the future did not lie in mahogany panels or antique globes. Now that Miller & Sons are facing the threat of a hostile takeover by technology investment company Digital Horizon Capital, the crisis has reached its climax. None of them, neither their father, nor their mother, nor Uncle Gerald, nor any of the proud directors, knew that Digital Horizon Capital was a subsidiary of Ether Grid Technologies. My company. I sat down at my laptop, opened the appropriate tab, booked a plane ticket, and chose a seat by the window. I was flying home. I didn't come home for reconciliation or to brag about my successes. I was coming back to buy the very company that once considered me a nobody. Before leaving, while packing my things, I accidentally came across an old family photo, faded, with shiny faces and empty eyes, standing between the pages of a notebook. Olivia came in, noticing me staring thoughtfully at the picture. "Are you sure you want to do this?" "What is it?" she asked softly, her voice full of sympathy but also concern. I looked at her, nodded, and put the photo in my jacket pocket. They taught me that money is the only measure of value, I said, feeling the words fall into the air with the weight of fate. It's time to show them exactly what I'm worth. I could not have imagined how deeply my return would shock the Miller family, how bittersweet this meeting would be, and how hard it would be for me to do what at first seemed like just an act of symbolic justice. But there was a path ahead, and it started from the moment the plane lifted off the ground. The headquarters of the Miller and Sons Investment Group remained unchanged, as if frozen in an ambitious stone age, with its imposing limestone facade, shining polished gold letters flawlessly lined along the pediment, as if confident in their own steadfastness, and an atmosphere of the same aristocratic isolation that has been nourished for centuries by the conviction of the infallibility of their position. This was not the first time I had stood in front of these doors, but for the first time, not as a daughter, confused and humiliated, not as an exile forced to leave home with only one suitcase, but as the CEO of a company with the power to change the fate of an empire that had once rejected me. I walked through the front doors calmly and confidently, without turning around or pausing for a moment. I had a tablet with a presentation in my hands, a ring on my fingers, bought not for my last name, but for my work, and a light of calm determination in my eyes. A young woman was sitting at the reception desk, busily reviewing a list of appointments. "Mr. Carter, I'm here to see the board," I said clearly and calmly, naming the name I chose 6 years ago when I decided to become myself without looking back. The receptionist looked up and smiled politely, completely unaware that she had just let a prodigal daughter into the heart of the old building, who had returned not for forgiveness, but for the truth. She escorted me to the elevator that went up to the top floor, to where the boardroom was located, where the destinies of both people and companies were once decided. The entrance to this hall seemed almost like a dream. Everything was exactly as I remembered it: dark wood paneling, a massive fireplace with portraits of former heads of the company proudly hanging above it, a heavy family coat of arms cast in bronze, and this table, long, shiny, icy. I remembered hiding under it as a child, holding my breath, listening to my father make deals in a husky voice, building a future in which, as he believed then, there was no place for doubt and weakness. But I wasn't hiding today. I sat at the head of this very table, in the chair that used to be his, and waited, looking straight ahead, not allowing myself a drop of emotion. One by one, the members of the board of directors entered the room. I recognized faces that had aged a little, with new wrinkles, with fatigue in their eyes, behind which anxiety was hidden. They were followed by the heads of departments, in ties, with tablets, in tense silence. And finally, he appeared, my father. Time was merciless to him. His posture became lower, his shoulders slouched, and his face turned gray. The domineering charisma that once filled the room with his appearance has faded. He sat down without taking his eyes off me, and I saw that he didn't recognize me. He looked at me intently, frowned, and, not knowing who I was, mistook me for someone else, strong and dangerous. "Gentlemen," I began smoothly, maintaining a professional tone, "I am here on behalf of Digital Horizon Capital in connection with our offer to acquire Miller and Sons." My father reacted instantly, as if instinct had returned to him before consciousness. "We are not interested in being bought out by some technology company," he snapped, still not understanding who he was talking to. "Miller and Sons has been around for 120 years. And it will collapse in 5 minutes, I replied, giving myself the right to speak no longer in the voice of an investor, but in a person they once did not hear. "If it doesn't start developing." "Isn't that right, father?" A heavy, thick silence hung in the hall. The people in suits froze, turning their heads first to me, then to him. He was looking at me, and suddenly I saw recognition creep into his face, as he lost color, as if realizing something irreversible. "Charles," he breathed, and there was confusion in the name. "Hi, Dad," I said with a soft grin. Mr. Johnson, one of the oldest members of the council, a man with soft eyes and a warm smile, blinked at me. "Little Charles Miller," he said, as if he couldn't believe his eyes. "Actually," I corrected gently, "I'm Charles Carter now. And I'm not here as your son. I'm here to discuss the future of this company." My father's face froze at first, then a shadow of rage flashed across it, like a wave hiding fear. This is some kind of trick, he said. Do you work at Digital Horizon? I smiled, calmly, restrained, without malice. No, father. I am the owner of Digital Horizon. It is a subsidiary of Ether Grid Technologies. And at that moment, an almost choral sigh swept through the hall. People suddenly realized who was in front of them. Yes, I nodded. Ether Grid Technologies is a company that has spearheaded a global revolution in energy storage. And now he holds the keys to your future. It's impossible, his father whispered, and his voice became thin as dry ice. You left with nothing. I looked at him, gently, without reproach. No, I replied, I left with $99. That was your last lesson about the value of money. I paused. Do you want to know what this lesson has taught? I turned to my assistant, who, as if on cue, came to the table and began handing out neatly prepared folders to each member of the board of directors, with a proposal, with analyses, with a roadmap. Everything was done flawlessly, professionally, without unnecessary pathos, as befits a person who knows his own worth, not because he was told, but because he proved it himself. Currently, Ether Grid Technologies is valued at more than $8 billion, a figure that, as it seemed to me, echoed in the hall like a thunderclap, breaking the usual silence, in which only the confident voices of old men always sounded. I looked at the faces of the board members, and I saw in them not just amazement, but a mixture of shock and fear of what they had missed, not seeing, not believing, not wanting to listen. Digital Horizon, I continued, flipping through the pages of the folder in front of me, is our investment division, which for some reason you did not bother to study properly, despite its rapid growth and participation in most recent technology transactions. I paused, allowing them to digest what I had heard, and then, raising my voice a little, I said clearly, over the past year, Digital Horizon has quietly acquired Miller & Sonntag through several separate investment channels. I opened the folder and looked around the table. As of this morning, we own 47% of your shares. We also control a significant portion of your corporate debt, which, given your recent financial difficulties, has become particularly severe. My gaze stopped on my father's face, and I saw it slowly turn pale. It was as if all the air had been drained from his lungs, his breathing stopped, his eyes clouded, and his posture, once fearsome, sagged in the chair like the crumbling facade of an old building. Sitting in front of him was not his daughter, whom he had written off as a loser, but a woman who had returned to claim everything that had once been most precious to him. It's a simple suggestion, I said, translating the page. Miller & Sons will be completely absorbed by Digital Horizon Capital. The company's name will be abolished, and the board of directors will be dissolved. I looked up and, meeting his gaze, said clearly, and you, father, will resign immediately. His mouth opened slightly, and he muttered, You can't do this. The family legacy is already dying, I interrupted him, and in my voice, contrary to expectations, there was neither anger nor contempt, only facts. Your strategies are outdated, your systems are dead, and your pride has blinded you so much that you no longer see reality. I tried to warn you 4 years ago. But you were too stubborn to listen. Mr. Johnson cleared his throat, as if hoping to restore some semblance of peace. Charles, he began softly, will probably find another way out. You're still Miller. I lifted my chin, letting steel ring in my voice. No. You made that clear to me the day I left your house with only one suitcase and $99 in my wallet. I stopped being Miller when I decided to build a future instead of clinging to the dusty past. I stood up, slowly, with dignity, straightening my custom-made suit in New York. It cost more than those $99 multiplied by 1,000. You have 48 hours to accept the offer, I said, stepping into the center of the room. If you refuse, Digital Horizon will demand the immediate repayment of all outstanding loans. Miller & Sons won't survive this week. My father finally found the strength to speak. He got to his feet, leaning on the table as if only the furniture was keeping him from falling. You're destroying your family's company, he said, in a voice that sounded not only angry, but also hurt, everything that we built. I looked at him and, bowing my head a little, said sadly, No. You destroyed it when you refused to change. I'm offering you a chance to save what can still be saved: jobs, customers, and perhaps your legacy. But whether this legacy will bear Miller's name is no longer up to you to decide. I started for the door, but when I took a step, I stopped. There was an oppressive silence in the room, in which only fear and the realization of defeat breathed. I turned around, and meeting his gaze, I added, "Oh, and Father, do you remember those $99 that you threw at my feet?" He nodded almost imperceptibly. "It turns out that this was the best investment you've ever made," I said, no longer with anger, but with cold clarity. "When you said that money is the only measure of a person's worth, tell me, how much am I worth now by your standards?" The next 48 hours flew by in a whirlwind: endless calls from lawyers, morning reports on Bloomberg, news headlines on major financial portals, urgent press inquiries, pulsating stock charts. The news that Ether Grid Technologies acquired Miller and Son spread like a storm, sweeping away everything in its path. The stock exchange reacted immediately. Stocks jumped, the market froze, then rumbled. The comments came one after another. My father did everything in his power to stop this process. He raised old ties, called on former allies for help, and negotiated, hoping to thwart the deal. But I've already thought of everything. Every step, every workaround, every possible loophole has been closed. The potential rescuers he was trying to attract have been working with us for a long time, quietly, professionally, and faithfully. And so, in the same meeting room where he once, without hesitation, threw a bill, intentionally incomplete, at my feet as a symbol of my allegedly insufficient importance, the documents were signed that consolidated the transition of power, property, and the future. The folders were laid out, the signatures were put. The story closed another page, but this time it was written by me. My father's empire has now become mine, not as a form of revenge, not as a trophy wrested from a fight, and certainly not as a tribute to old grievances, but as a quiet, indisputable confirmation that the world is changing, that ideas that no one once believed in can become the driving force of a new era. When the last signatures were signed and the room was empty, leaving only the rustle of papers and the rustle of folders closing, he slowly approached me. He looked older than ever before. His face, once so impenetrably self-confident, was now tired, pale, with shadows under his eyes, as if everything he had been carrying inside for a long time had finally broken through. But behind his tired eyes, I noticed something I hadn't expected in any way. Perhaps it was respect, albeit belated, even hidden behind a layer of bitterness, or maybe it was just acceptance, inevitable, difficult, but real. "You planned this," he said softly, without anger, almost with admiration, which still hid an attempt to save face. "All of it." I looked at him with restraint, with dignity that had been forged over the years, sleepless nights, hardships, and faith. "No, Father," I replied. "You did it. The day you decided that my dreams were unworthy of even respect, when you felt that only your vision had the right to exist. I just built something better than you could ever imagine." He looked away for a moment, as if the struggle inside him had finally cracked, and then asked softly, "And now you're going to ruin it all, out of revenge?" I stared at him for a long time, letting the silence say more than words could. "No," I finally said. "I'm going to rebuild everything into something meaningful. Miller and Sons will no longer be just a name on the facade and a machine for transferring money between accounts. She will become part of a company working to solve the global energy crisis. It's not yours anymore. This is poetic justice." I was about to turn around, about to leave, when I heard him say, "Charles," behind me. I turned around, and he added, with a kind of sad half-smile, almost in a whisper, "Those $99. I smiled. "The best investment you've ever made." She showed me exactly who I don't want to become. The transition took 5 months. It was months of total restructuring. I reviewed every business model, optimized every process, upgraded the infrastructure, reduced inefficient departments, but most importantly, I retained most of the employees, because I knew that they were not the enemies, but the system that made them hostages of the past. I switched the company to clean energy development, reallocated resources to research climate-resilient battery systems, and implemented a transparency policy that had never existed before. My father, realizing that he was no longer playing the leading role in the play he was used to dictating, quietly retired. He moved to the old family estate, the same one where I grew up, where for the first time I felt that I didn't fit in. His pride was certainly hurt, but I made sure that he had everything he needed for a quiet, secure life. Not out of guilt, I've long since said goodbye to that burden, but because to do otherwise would be to become like someone I once decided to surpass. My mother tried to contact me several times, letters sent through assistants, a couple of awkward calls that I did not accept. Some bridges collapse with such a roar that their echoes still resound in the heart for a long time. But restoring them means building a path back to where you've already left forever. A year has passed. I stood in my corner office at the headquarters of Ether Grid Technologies, high above the streets of Austin, looking at the dawn, which painted the glass facades of buildings in warm gold. Olivia came in, as usual, without knocking, with a small package in her hands. "From your father," she said calmly. I opened the box. Inside were those crisp $99 bills, folded neatly like a memory that could no longer be ignored. There is a short note next to it: "You were worth more than I thought." I took the money and went back to where it all started. To the very cafe where I once spent the night among the bags of coffee, where I drew my first sketches, dreaming of changing the world. The same barista who had once offered me shelter was now a senior manager at Ether Grid. We hugged, without words, without unnecessary things. I ordered a latte and left a $99 tip on the table. Not for the sake of a dramatic gesture, but because sometimes the path closes not loudly, but quietly, almost sacredly. And the coffee, after all, was still tastier in Menlo Park, California. Some will say that I took revenge. But no. I didn't take the company away from my father to get revenge. I did it because sometimes, to fix something that's really broken, you need to have the courage to tear it down and rebuild it, more solidly, more honestly, more justly. They say money can't buy happiness, and maybe there's truth to that. But that $99 taught me so much more. The true value is not in what you inherited, and not in what you can lose. True value is measured by what you create out of the little you have. And I built an empire not because of my last name, but in spite of it. That $99 wasn't just a start. They became a symbol of freedom, the freedom to become who I was supposed to be, no matter what. And the millions that came later? They were just proof that I was right from the start.